December 16th, 1944, early morning near Monschau, Germany. The frozen ground shook as another wave of American artillery tore across the sky. But this time, something was different. Terrifyingly, impossibly different. The shells weren't striking dirt or trees. They were exploding in the air high above the advancing German lines, raining down lethal steel fragments that no foxhole could shield against, a dense, metallic precipitation of death that seemed to defy the known physics of the battlefield, turning the open fields and thin woods into killing zones from which there was no conceivable escape. Among the men of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division pressing against the 38th Cavalry Squadron's defenses, veterans hardened by years of brutal, grinding warfare on the Eastern Front, suddenly faced a kind of firepower they had never imagined, a spectral airborne scythe that made a mockery of their hard-earned survival instincts and trench warfare experience. The predictable impacts, the safe zones, the brief protection afforded by trenches and reverse slopes were all gone, completely eradicated by this new reality of death from above, delivered with an almost unearthly precision that suggested not merely superior gunnery, but a fundamental breakthrough in the science of destruction. At that precise, fateful moment, Lieutenant Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 46th Artillery Group had just taken one of the most consequential, life-or-death, and completely unauthorized actions of the entire Battle of the Bulge, a decision born out of pure tactical desperation in the face of imminent operational collapse, for without any official approval, and in direct, flagrant violation of the strictest, most closely guarded security orders issued by the highest levels of the Allied command, he commanded his batteries to immediately load and fire their most closely guarded secret, the proximity fuse, a revolutionary piece of technology inside each shell, an ingenious miniature radar unit capable of sensing its exact distance from the ground or any solid object below, and designed to detonate at the absolute perfect optimal height of 30 to 50 feet, maximizing the deadly, wide-reaching cone of fragmentation and transforming the effective lethality of American artillery by an estimated 50-fold, a technological leap that meant in the frozen rolling hills of the Ardennes, the very mathematics and probability of battlefield death had been irrevocably rewritten in favor of the defenders, and the German spearhead had just encountered a weapon so revolutionary and terrifying in its psychological and physical effects that it would forever reshape not only the immediate outcome of this desperate winter struggle, but the fundamental nature of modern warfare, permanently signaling the arrival of a new, scientifically optimized destruction that could not be countered by traditional infantry tactics or fortification. The storm had begun with staggering, brutal force as Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last great delusional gamble to reverse the inevitable course of the war, was unleashed. The Führer, clinging obsessively to the increasingly thin promise of a strategic reversal, had successfully amassed and cunningly hidden a staggering offensive force in the fog-shrouded, quiet sector of the Ardennes forest, a total of 200,000 men, supported by 1,000 tanks and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, the objective of which was nothing less than to split the entire Allied armies in two, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and ultimately force a negotiated peace that would free him to turn the full, undivided might of the Wehrmacht back toward the collapsing struggle against the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. At the pre-dawn hour of 05:30 on December 16th, the German guns opened fire in a coordinated, cataclysmic barrage of approximately 1,600 rounds per minute thundering across an 85-mile front, catching the Americans completely and utterly off guard. A catastrophic failure of Allied intelligence that was nearly total, as the massive German buildup went completely unseen and unheeded, and the thinly held front was manned largely by green, inexperienced replacements or combat-weary veterans sent to this sector for a supposedly much-needed rest, all of whom were about to be overwhelmed by a tidal wave of veteran German armor and infantry divisions. It was at the crucial northern hinge of the American line near Monschau that Colonel Axelson faced his impossible, career-ending, but ultimately necessary choice. The light reconnaissance force of the 38th Cavalry Squadron was being systematically crushed by overwhelming armored-supported German strength, and his standard artillery fire, though steady and maintained, was simply not sufficient to break the momentum of the furious assault. In a moment of pure, desperate battlefield exigency that military history would forever record, Axelson gave the unauthorized, fateful order: use the proximity fuses, effective immediately. A gamble that meant risking a court-martial, immediate arrest, and the absolute destruction of his military career for violating the highest level of national security, but the alternative, strict, cautious, and safe obedience to the standing orders, meant the certain, catastrophic defeat of the units under his protection and the subsequent collapse of the northern shoulder of the entire Allied line. The result was instantaneous, horrifying, and decisive, as the German troops, advancing in their classic, well-practiced assault formations, were suddenly, inexplicably torn apart by continuous airbursts detonating precisely 30 to 50 feet overhead, with each explosion casting a massive, lethal, high-velocity cone of fragmentation over a wide and inescapable area, an aerial scythe that soldiers who had once survived countless traditional barrages by simply clinging to their foxholes or ducking behind the modest cover of pine trees found no refuge from. This was the secret, terrifying science of destruction. The proximity fuse, officially designated the VT, variable time fuse, being the ultimate secret embodiment of American scientific and industrial ingenuity at its wartime peak, a radical departure from standard shells, which required a fickle impact or unreliable manually set mechanical timers, because these new shells carried a complete, self-contained, miniaturized Doppler radar system, no larger than a coffee can. The engineering required to house this system was a marvel of miniaturization and ruggedization, comprising over 130 components, including 4 or 5 specially designed miniature vacuum tubes, which had to be hardened to endure the crushing forces of 20,000 Gs of acceleration upon firing, forces that would utterly destroy any normal electronic component. At the moment of ignition and acceleration, the shock was harnessed to shatter a small glass ampule, which then activated a chemical battery, a simple yet genius solution to the power problem in a spinning shell, to energize the radar system for its brief but decisive flight, the entire design being the brilliant brainchild of Dr. Merle Tuve at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, APL, an effort so critical and shrouded in secrecy that it was consciously scaled to rival the scope and security of the Manhattan Project itself, operating initially out of a deeply unassuming location, a building disguised as a used car lot in Silver Spring, Maryland, and at its zenith, the lab employed a staggering 3% of all American physicists. Security surrounding the project was absolute and draconian, with workers forbidden from speaking about their work, even in the most abstract terms to their own families or spouses, and each fuse bore a unique, recorded serial number, tracked as meticulously and securely as the components of an atomic bomb, with failure to account for any single unit leading to immediate and intensive investigation. The technical challenges overcome were truly immense, requiring a complete reinvention of the standard radio vacuum tube, which had to be miniaturized, redesigned, and chemically hardened to survive not only the extreme acceleration and the rapid spin of the shell, but also the environmental rigors of rain, snow, and the bitter cold of the European winter, with a key breakthrough coming from Dr. James Van Allen, who would later gain fame for his work in space science, who created tubes no bigger than pencil erasers, yet fully functional under the necessary extreme stress. By late 1944, the massive, dedicated engine of American industry was producing 40,000 fuses per day, a monumental, coordinated effort involving over 100 companies, ranging from corporate giants like RCA and General Electric to smaller but crucial manufacturers like Sylvania and Crossley, and the total financial cost for the project reached well over $1 billion, making it second only to the Manhattan Project in its expense and national priority. Axelson's unauthorized gamble at Monschau, though instantly successful on the battlefield by halting the German spearhead, immediately sparked a major command crisis that reached the highest echelons of Allied leadership, primarily because the proximity fuse was strictly restricted for use in only naval and anti-aircraft defense. the standing security order dictating that it could not be fired over enemy-held land, the fear being that if a captured intact sample were to fall into German hands, they would quickly reverse engineer its secrets, leading to catastrophic consequences for Allied aerial superiority over both Europe and the Pacific. Yet, the undeniable power and immediate strategic necessity demonstrated at Monschau, where the German assault simply collapsed under the terrifying, incomprehensible fury of the airbursts, was a tactical fact that could not be ignored, and detailed reports detailing the weapon's singular effectiveness reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower's headquarters within days, dramatically escalating the urgency of the matter. On December 19th, Eisenhower, recognizing the severe strategic gravity of the situation and the critical need to stop the German momentum at any cost, urgently requested the full and complete release of the weapon for ground use, arguing that the immediate threat on the ground outweighed the risk of enemy capture. And after a rapid, high-level debate and consultation between Washington and London, all security restrictions were lifted by the 21st, and the proximity fuses were fully unleashed across the entire front of the Bulge. American logistics and transport systems moved with incredible, wartime swiftness to distribute the secret shells, and critical units like the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at the besieged crossroads of Bastogne received their first shipment just as the German ring of encirclement closed, while the 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion deployed them with their M7 Priest self-propelled guns, defending the crucial northwest sector. Even the 969th Field Artillery Battalion, a highly effective African-American unit under Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, fired them to devastating effect in the critical area south of the besieged town, and every single unit that fired the VT fuse reached the same, resounding